After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 imposed harsh economic and political penalties on Germany. This created widespread unrest in the country, paving the way for Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party to rise to power. Hitler promised to restore Germany's strength while spreading hateful propaganda against Jews and other minorities. His ideology also pushed the idea of Lebensraum, or living space, which aimed to expand German territory eastward. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, starting World War II. This was the beginning of Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, which combined fast-moving tanks and airstrikes to overwhelm enemies. Within weeks, Poland fell, and Germany and the Soviet Union split the country between them. Following the invasion, Britain and France declared war on Germany, but they couldn't save Poland. By 1940, Germany had occupied Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, and Belgium. German forces quickly advanced into France, capturing Paris and setting up a puppet government in the south called the Vichy regime. At this point, Britain was the only major power in Western Europe still resisting Hitler's control. In 1940, Germany tried to invade Britain during the Battle of Britain. The German Air Force, Luftwaffe, launched heavy bombing raids on Britain, but thanks to the Royal Air Force and new radar technology, Germany failed. This defeat was a turning point in the war. On June 22, 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. Initially, German troops advanced quickly, but the harsh Russian winter and fierce Soviet resistance stopped them. The Battle of Stalingrad, 1942 to 1943, marked a major turning point. The Soviets won a decisive victory and began pushing the Germans back on the Eastern Front. Meanwhile, on December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, drawing the United States into the war. Japan had been rapidly expanding across the Pacific, but the U.S. joined the Allies and began fighting in both Europe and the Pacific. With America's military and economic strength, the Allies gained significant momentum. In 1944, the Allies launched the D-Day invasion, Normandy landings, to liberate Western Europe from Nazi control. Starting on June 6th, Allied forces successfully freed France and began driving German forces back. At the same time, the Soviet Union advanced from the east, getting closer to Berlin. In May 1945, Berlin fell, and Hitler committed suicide. Germany surrendered, ending the war in Europe. However, the war in the Pacific continued. To force Japan to surrender, the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. These devastating attacks led to Japan's surrender, officially ending the war. World War II caused the deaths of around 70 million people, making it the deadliest conflict in history. It reshaped the political, economic, and social structures of many nations and marked the start of the Cold War era. But what if it hadn't happened? What if World War II had never started? A world where Adolf Hitler never rose to power and the Nazi Party never took control. What if the aggressive expansion of Germany had been stopped before it even began? In this alternative world, Europe's future could have been drastically different. The Treaty of Versailles, which was meant to bring peace after World War I, imposed extremely harsh terms on Germany. These terms caused major economic struggles and social unrest, which created the perfect environment for extreme nationalist and fascist groups to rise to power. But what if the treaty had been more fair? If the Allies had created a more balanced and peaceful agreement, Germany's future might have taken a completely different turn. Without the crushing burden of reparations and economic hardship, maybe Germany could have avoided the rise of fascism altogether. In this scenario, Hitler might never have come to power. Without Hitler in charge, the Nazi Party's aggressive and expansionist plans would never have taken shape. The entire ideology of the Third Reich, based on racial purity and territorial conquest, would have been non-existent. Without the invasion of Poland, the war in Europe might have been completely avoided. France, Britain, and other European countries might have found themselves building a peaceful, cooperative Europe instead of engaging in destructive conflict. Germany's economy could have grown steadily without the need for expansionist wars. The country could have used its industrial power to strengthen its economy through trade and cooperation with neighboring countries. Without the rise of Nazism, Germany might have become one of the leading economies in Europe and perhaps even avoided the massive human losses caused by the war. Peace in Europe could have meant more resources being spent on innovation, education, and infrastructure rather than military preparations. In this peaceful scenario, France and the UK could have focused on their domestic issues rather than preparing for war. The lingering tensions from World War I could have slowly been eased as Germany and the rest of Europe focused on rebuilding and strengthening diplomatic relations. Countries that had suffered during the Great War could have found a way to recover from the economic disaster that affected much of Europe during the 1920s and 1930s. If the Soviet Union hadn't been forced to prepare for an invasion from Germany, it might have pursued more diplomatic relations with the West instead of preparing for war. In fact, it's possible that the USSR could have grown closer to the Western powers, leading to a more unified approach to European security and political stability. Without the fear of a Nazi invasion, the Soviet Union might have focused more on internal reforms and growing its own economy. The United States, on the other hand, might have avoided getting involved in European conflicts altogether. The absence of World War II would have meant that the U.S. could have continued focusing on its own economic growth and strengthening its political and trade relations with countries around the world. Instead of entering the war, the United States could have used its resources to help rebuild Europe in a non-violent manner, investing in trade and industry rather than military alliances. The Great Depression could have ended more smoothly as a result of increased international cooperation and economic growth. Technological advancements might have taken a different direction as well. Without the pressures of war, many of the scientific discoveries and technological innovations developed during World War II could have been focused on peaceful applications. Medical advancements like antibiotics and vaccines might have been accelerated without the devastation of war. The development of nuclear technology might have been strictly for peaceful energy purposes, rather than becoming a tool of destruction. Instead of mass-producing weapons, nations could have worked together to build a more stable, prosperous world. However, even in this peaceful world, challenges would have remained. The Great Depression could have dragged on for longer, causing further poverty, unemployment, and social instability. The lack of a global war might have meant that the world wouldn't have had a major reset, which could have meant that the global economy might have struggled to recover. Without the war, it's possible that extreme political ideologies could have continued to rise, leading to further unrest and division. The lack of a unified cause, like the defeat of fascism, could have left countries divided over how to address the global crises they were facing. Furthermore, the world's power dynamics could have been very different. The Soviet Union might have emerged as the dominant power in Eastern Europe, but without the war to propel the United States to a global leadership role, it's unclear who would have taken the lead in rebuilding the global order. Instead of a bipolar world with the US and the Soviet Union as superpowers, we might have seen a more fractured world where countries struggled to maintain influence and control. In this alternative history, global conflicts might have been avoided, but at the same time, new tensions and challenges would have arisen. Perhaps the world would have found a different path to progress, one that didn't rely on war, but still faced political and economic struggles. It's impossible to say how the world would have evolved, but without World War II, the entire 20th century would have looked drastically different. Instead of rebuilding after a devastating war, nations might have built a different kind of future, focused on diplomacy and cooperation. The peace might have been fragile, but the world would have had the chance to build a future without the scars of global conflict. Yet, no matter what happened, the events of the past still shape the world today, and we can only imagine what might have been if things had unfolded differently. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more fascinating stories about history's greatest figures and events.